Almighty and everlasting God, you've given us grace by the confession of a true faith to acknowledge the glory of the eternal Trinity, and in thy divine majesty to worship the unity. We beseech thee that thou wouldst keep us steadfast in this faith, and evermore defend us from all adversities, who livest and reignest one God, world without end. Amen. Isaiah 'twas foretold it, the rose I have in mind, with Mary we behold it, the Virgin Mother kind. To show God's love aright, she bore to us a Savior, when half was spent was the night. We now turn again to the volume 3 of John Whitgift, Tractates 11 to 23, which he's dealing with Tom Cartwright. This is 1853, University of Toronto. Biographical memoir of John Whitgift, so I wasn't expecting this. Volume 3. The Life of Archbishop Whitgift was first written by Sir George Paul, the comptroller of his household. A large folio volume was subsequently compiled by the laborious strip containing his life and acts. The vast mass of matter therein contained could not be transferred to the present pages. A mere outline of the Archbishop's history and character is all that can be attempted. The family of Whitgift was of good antiquity in the West Riding of the York County. John Whitgift, the grandfather of the Archbishop, had two sons, Henry, a merchant of Great Grimsby in Lincolnshire, and Robert, who became abbot of Wellow or Wellgrove by Grimsby, besides a daughter, Isabel. Henry, having married Anne Dinawell, a lady of respectable parentage at Grimsby, had by her 6 sons and a daughter. John, the eldest, was born at Grimsby in 1530, or according to some accounts, in 1533, and was entrusted for his education to his uncle, the abbot. One of those clear-sighted and reflecting men who, before the full light of the Reformation shone, were becoming aware of the rottenness of the popish system. For he was often heard to say that he had read the Holy Scriptures over and over, but could never find there the religion that was founded by God. He foreboded, therefore, that it would not long endure. Was this? He was entrusted to his uncle, the abbot. This is the father abbot, or the uncle. He, perceiving the quickness of his nephew's parts, placed him for a time in St. Anthony's School in London, then in high repute, where Sir Thomas More and Dr. Nicholas Heath, Archbishop of York in Queen Mary's reign, had been scholars. The young Whitgift lodged while attending this school at the house of his aunt in St. Paul's Churchyard, and 1 or 2 passages of his life have been recorded. It seems that he could by no means be persuaded to attend morrow mass at the cathedral, and manifested such dislike to the prevailing superstitions that his horror-stricken relative, attributing to his sojourn with her some misfortunes that had occurred, sent him back to his father. Her farewell being that though she thought at first she had received a saint into her house, she now perceived he was a devil. In 1548 or 1549, he was sent to Cambridge and placed in Queen's College, but afterwards migrated to Pembroke Hall, where Bishop Ridley was master, and Grindal and Bradford at that time fellows, the latter becoming his tutor. On his recommendation, backed by Grindal, he was appointed to a scholarship and made Bible clerk, a very acceptable emolument, as his father's circumstances were now embarrassed by great losses at sea. In 1553-54, he commenced BA and was elected Fellow of Peterhouse in 1555. He's 25 now, when the horror show's going on at Cambridge, being admitted with two others May 31 of that year, so he's a veteran. Dr. Andrew Pern was then master of the college and proved a kind patron and fast friend of Whitgift, for not only did he have him carefully attended when suffering under a dangerous sickness, but shielded him in 1556 during the perilous visitation of the university by commissioners appointed under Cardinal Pole's authority. Whitgift had conceived it impossible to escape their severity without violation of his conscience, and therefore resolved to retire to the continent. But by Dr. Pern's persuasion, who being at that time vice chancellor, had it in his power to protect him, he relinquished his intention and remained unmolested without any unworthy concession. Better times were approaching, and after the accession of Queen Elizabeth, he was ordained in 1560. So what do we say he is? It was 1530 is when he was born. Yeah. This is sad. I had to live through all this nightmare. That woman, Spanish king, and preached his first sermon at St. Mary's from Romans 1:16, obtaining thereby great credit with his audience. His degrees were MA 1556, BD 1563, and DD 1567, on which last occasion he maintained in his act the thesis Papa est illa ante Christus. About the time of his commencing BD, he was made Margaret Professor of Divinity, succeeding Dr. Hutton, afterwards Archbishop of York. In his public lectures while in the post, he expounded the Epistle to the Hebrews and the Book of Revelation, and obtained so entirely the confidence of the university that for his sake the stipend was augmented July 5, 1566, from 20 marks to 20 pounds a year. Whitgift was now much engaged in the public affairs of the university. At the latter end of the year 1565, he joined with Vice Chancellor Dr. Beaumont, Master of Trinity, and others in an urgent letter to Cecil, their chancellor, deprecating the orders made for the stricter use of the apparel. This letter was, however, ill-taken, and a severe rebuke administered to the vice-chancellor. But no serious check was thereby caused by Whitfield's growing influence and reputation, for we find his name in the list of Lenten preachers at court in 1566. And June 10 of that year, he had a license from the university to preach throughout the realm. April 21, 1567, he succeeded Dr. Hutton in the mastership of Pembroke Hall, but there he stayed but a few weeks. For July 4, he was made Master of Trinity, having successfully vindicated himself from some suspicion of a leaning to nonconformity. But at the same time, he again succeeded Dr. Hutton as Regius Professor of Divinity. The Queen, too, took a liking to him when she had heard him preach before her, and punning on his name said that he had a white gift. Indeed, she in consequence made him one of her chaplains. He obtained, moreover, preferment in the church, for having been chaplain to Cox, Bishop of Ely. He was by that prelate collated to the rectory of Teversholm, and on December 5, 1560, to a prebendal stall in Ely Cathedral. In the administration of his college, the new master of Trinity was active and conscientious. In 1569, he resisted the claims of Westminster School upon the scholarships of Trinity, taking up so many places that room was left for scarcely any other deserving young men. It was consequently arranged that 2 only should be sent yearly from that school to each university, and 3 every 3rd year. A modern eloquent writer, little disposed to approve generally of Whitgift's proceedings, allows him the praise of having rendered in this important service to letters. He stood up manfully, says Mr. Macaulay, against those who wished to make Trinity College a mere appendage to Westminster School, and by this act saved the noblest place of education in England from the degrading fate of King's College and New College. The college required a strong hand to govern. So eager a spirit of opposition to the habits was roused one Sunday in the master's absence, sermons having been preached against the surplus. All the members, only 3 excepted, appearing that evening in the chapel without their surplices. Most of them did not. And Thomas Cartwright was a principal leader in this movement. He was a Hertfordshire man, born about 1535, and was now a fellow of Trinity. And when Whitgift resigned the Regius professorship and was succeeded by Chatterton, Margaret Professor, Cartwright was appointed to the vacant place. His position in his college and in the university gave him considerable influence, which he unsparingly used for the furtherance of his principles. This Whitgift labored to oppose both by private expostulation and more public discourses. And at length, when Cartwright, as Margaret Professor, had maintained in his lectures opinions utterly irreconcilable with the government and order of the Church of England as it was settled, formal proceedings were instituted against him. He was refused the degree of Doctor of Divinity, suspended from lecturing, and finally, having appeared December 11, 1570, before Whitgift, now Vice Chancellor, and other heads, he was, as he would make no concession, deprived of his professorship and inhibited from preaching within the jurisdiction of the university. He was subsequently, in September 1572, expelled from Trinity, as he was not in priest's orders according to the statutes. Whitgift announces this to Archbishop Parker in a letter dated September 21 of that year, in which he declares that he had been aware of the true state of the case, he would have sooner removed Cartwright. He is, he goes on, flatly perjured, and I am verily persuaded that it is God's just judgment that he should, for not being minister, be so punished, which has so greatly defaced the ministry. God so often so disposing that the sin is visible, even in the punishment. Cartwright was evidently a man of considerable attainments and had become very popular in Cambridge, insomuch that several members of the university interceded with the chancellor on his behalf, commending his character, piety, and learning in the highest terms. It's apprehended, however, that few, even of those who favored his cause, could approve of his using the influence of his professor's chair to attack the constitution of the church, or could avoid blaming his pertinacious holding to his fellowship in defiance of the statutes which he'd sworn to observe. Whitgift charged him also with offending against the oath which he'd taken to obey the master of his college. Submissive and obedient he unquestionably had not been, and jealous opposition grew between the two, Cartwright regarding Whitgift as his personal enemy, and Whitgift, whose temper was quick, stung by the taunts with which he was assailed. boast was made that Cartwright's offer of disputation was declined. But the fact was, as it is proved by documentary evidence, that he had himself refused Whitgift's challenge, and this he confessed at the time when he was deprived of his professorship. In 1571, Whitgift, having resigned his former license from the university to preach, received another and was constituted one of the university preachers. October 31 in the same year, he had a dispensation from the Archbishop of Canterbury to hold an additional piece of preferment. Convocation meeting soon after, he preached the Latin sermon at its opening from Acts 15:6, touching upon the institution of synods, the enemy of the church, enemies of the church, Puritans and Papists, on the garments and ornaments used in the church, and on other things requiring reformation. And next year, being Dean of Lincoln, in which dignity he was installed, August 2, 1571, he was chosen May 14, 1572, Prolocutor of the Lower House. Troubled as he had been in Cambridge, he now had serious thoughts of quitting the place. But his design becoming known, several of the heads wrote, September 28, 1572, to the Chancellor, Cecil, expressive of their sense of Whitgift's merits and of the loss the university would sustain if he were to retire. His purpose was, therefore, it seems, abandoned. At this time, he was engaged upon the admonition controversy. The notorious work comprised 2 parts or treatises, and they were appended to it a letter from Gualter to Bishop Parkhurst of Norwich, and another from Beza to Grindal, Bishop of London. It was printed without an author's name, but was understood to have been written by John Field or Thomas Wilcox, who were thereupon committed to Newgate. Though called an admonition to the Parliament, it was never presented to that assembly, but was dispersed throughout the kingdom with great zeal, several editions being speedily printed. It was followed by another similar piece entitled A Second Admission to the Parliament, written, it is supposed, by Cartwright himself. The mischief that such a book as the admonition was likely to do was thought by Archbishop Parker to require an immediate reply. He therefore made his choice of Dr. Whitgift to compose an answer. Before this was published, one Mr. Norton, a learned clergyman and friend of Whitgift, wrote an earnest letter dissuading him from a public reply, not because he approved the admonition, which was, he said, fond and with unreasonableness and unseasonableness, had hindered much good and done much harm, but because he thought if he let the matter alone, it would die quietly, whereas a controversy would exasperate men's minds and give pleasure to the papists. The letter was dated October 20, 1572, and received an answer from Whitgift October 25, meeting his friend's objection and explaining at length the reasons why he felt compelled to come forward. The subject could not be stifled. It was of too serious a cast to be passed over. Whitgift himself, who'd been slandered as shrinking from the defense of his principles, was bound to show that he was ready to maintain them. And besides, the plain setting forth of the truth in opposition to error must be productive of good. These arguments had their weight with Norton, especially when he saw that the admonitionists were not inclined to be quiet, but were pouring out their books. This he expressed to the Archbishop in a letter dated January 16, 1572-73. Whitgift's answer was completed before this last date. In the progress of it, he'd been careful to obtain the judgment of the Archbishop, and had also consulted, among others, Cooper, Bishop of Lincoln, and Dr. Pern. The second and enlarged edition appeared in the year 1573. And we must take leave here. Let's pray. Worthy is the Lamb that was slain to receive power and riches, wisdom, strength, and glory and blessing. Amen. Let's be